of your home. Air brick covers come in 3 different colours and sizes, shaping the future of pest control.
Now, he also talks about mind control. It's another major thing that he's exposed. As I say, he was exposed in 1997 and before 1997. MK Ultra mind control and the Cathy O'Brien case.
Yes,
So
yes.
you want to just give us a few words on your understanding of that particular?
Yes, I mean the Cathy O'Brien case is there's a lot of information in there. Mark Phillips was allegedly this chap who found out that Cathy O'Brien was a mind-controlled sex slave working with high-powered politicians, and mainly in the US, but not exclusively there. And he somehow, quote-unquote, rescued her and took her to some kind of sanctuary, I think in Alaska, and sort of then became her guardian. And Cathy O'Brien had a child called Kelly, who I think, if we look at the current age, this child I think is in her 30s now, who had also been the victim of ritual abuse, as was Cathy. And then they wrote this book called Transformation of America, which I think was first published around 97, I think, and then I think there was another version was published, or a second edition or something in year 2000, around then. And there are some very graphic revelations in that book, some of which David Icke has also referred to in his books, and some of which he hasn't. And it's definitely worth reading that to see what you think of how far some of these mind control and ritual abuse rings go.
Am I right in thinking that some of these women that were taken as children by the CIA and hypnotized and put through MK Ultra style mind control programming to be used as sex slaves in blackmail traps and for other uses, some of them have actually had compensation?
I wasn't aware of that. But if that's the case,
I do seem to remember seeing a public trial in the States of women who claim to have been abused by the state in that way.
I wasn't aware.
You're not aware of that? Okay.
No.
I think that I can check up on that.
Okay.
And Ike talks about how these women are obtained. They look for people with certain traits and who are from certain backgrounds who will be more suitable for mind control.
That's right. I mean, certainly in Cathy O'Brien's case, she does, as part of that book, she gives a sort of autobiography, and she said that her father was an abuser. He abused her from a very young age, from when she was a baby, basically. So her claim is that that's why she was taken into the program, because she was already ritually abused by her family, and a lot of these people come from families where ritual abuse goes on.
Another thing that he was exposing in '97 was mass shooting incidents, which we've seen so many of those recently.
Yes.
And he was unpicking them and showing that the official stories are a crock of shit, basically. Now, he took questions at the end of this particular lecture, and I've just noted some of them. He was asked about alien life, and we are going to come on to this. Someone asked him whether he agrees that there's alien life, and he said that he doesn't have a problem that there's ET life somewhere in the universe, which I think that I would say that's the prevailing view these days.
Yes,
there's got to be life somewhere in the universe. And I'm paraphrasing from his lecture here. He says that we don't know whether man he's talking about UFO sightings here. We don't know whether man has state-of-the-art technology that can do mutilations. So he's questioning whether animal mutilation is a man-made or an ET phenomenon. That's a fair enough point. He says, I believe myself that the missing link, this is the link between Homo sapiens and other hominid species where there appears to be this gap in the evolutionary path. He says that the missing link, I believe myself that the missing link was extraterrestrial intervention. And this has been put forward by people like Sitchin and Lloyd Pye. The UFO subject is being manipulated, and he asks the question, who benefits from it? He's asked who is the real power at the top of the pyramid, and he talks about bloodlines back to Babylon and speculatively to Atlantis. And he's asked whether aliens are in charge, and this is 1997. and this is what he says. He says, it could well be that at the end of this bloodline, at the beginning, may quite well have been. I don't know. It's possible that an extraterrestrial civilization of some kind would have since helped to manipulate these bloodlines in their position of power and take over. It's all speculation, but it's all going to come out in the next few years, I think. No mention of reptilians there.
Yeah.
Right? He's alluding to the work of Sitchin. Okay.
Yes.
Possibly the Anunnaki.
Because I mean, Sitchin's books have been around for about 20 years by then, because Sitchin was writing in the 70s, wasn't he? So.
And then he says, at the top there, I think, are people interacting with either extraterrestrials or certainly a malevolent consciousness. All right. So he's saying that the people who at the very top, there's some sort of interaction with a malevolent consciousness, or possibly extraterrestrials. They are knowingly interacting with this consciousness in satanic rituals. All right, so again, no mention of reptilians there. He goes on to talk about the 13 bloodline families. Bloodlines came out of Babylon or Egypt or whatever was before, and eventually make their way up to Europe. So he's talking about these bloodlines coming into the modern day and then being involved in the power structures today. Now, when we decided to make this program, what kind of sparked it off was David Icke appeared on a mainstream TV program, the Andrew Neil Show. They call it the political late-night discussion program called This Week. And I texted Andrew. I said, "Oh, Ike's, watch this. It's coming on TV." It surprised me that he was going to be on that program. To be honest, I thought he was banned from mainstream TV. So we both watched it, and we'll take a look at it now, Andrew. Let's just have a look at this clip.
The same people that told us there were weapons of mass destruction in Iraq when they knew they weren't, those very same people gave us the official story of 9/11. And what the mainstream media is doing...
Was 9/11 a conspiracy?
Of course it was.
Who was behind it?
Well, what was behind it was...
No, who was behind it?
Well, again, in the time we've got here, it's very difficult. But there is a network that works through government agencies, through organisations like the CIA, etc., to push an agenda on the world which is unfolding by the day. My books in the 1990s laid out what this agenda was, and those books are now being read on the television news in changes in society and laws coming in.
Okay.
And the thing is, this is the point, the mainstream media has accepted that those same characters lied about Iraq, but will not question in any way the same people's version of 9/11. They're journalists, it's their job.
But do you still think the royal family were shape-shifting lizards?
Yes, I do.
You do?
Yes.
And you also want us to believe 9/11 is a conspiracy?
Yes, but the
doesn't that rather undermine... I mean,
well, no, it
I
doesn't.
can see the point that you might have some question 9/11, but if you also think that Buckingham Palace is inhabited by lizards, it kind of undermines
but it's not
it.
that. It's not that simple. There's a whole big backstory before you get to what I'm saying.
All right. So, as we can see there, Andrew, he gets in his point about 9/11, but he's what's the word I'm looking for? He's dealt with by this mark about, do you think the Queen is a reptile?
Yes.
Do you
he does, yeah, and he says, yeah, I do. He says he still thinks that she is, you know.
Or can turn into one.
Yeah. Yes.
Right.
Yeah.
Okay.
But then, you know, the thing that struck me about that clip as well, or a couple of things, was that he was allowed to mention his world tour. You know, when Andrew Neil just casually says, "Oh, so what are you doing these days?" and David Icke says, "Well, I'm going on a world tour." You know, so can we count that as free publicity from the BBC? You know?
All right. Now then, but as I mentioned, probably the most controversial point about David Icke is the mention of reptilians, reptilian hybrids and reptiles, and we're going to look into that in some detail now. Now let's just, so 1997, as far as we are aware, there's no mention in any of his books or his videos. So going to just talk briefly about a 1998 video called The Freedom Road. You can watch it online. And some of the things that he talks about, some of the same things, fear and herd mentality, pyramid of power. He talks about meeting a man from the CIA who works as a scientist. So he claims to have made contact with someone from the CIA, which I think is significant. And he says that this person from the CIA has a patch on his chest that has to be filled with this golden liquid every 72 hours to keep him alive. So he's had information from this person from the CIA who's told him about certain hidden technology, that he talks about there being cures for cancer, free energy. He talks about megaliths and how the megaliths in the ancient world couldn't possibly have been built by human beings, this kind of thing. Knowledge and power in the ancient world and how that's secretly been passed to the elite of the modern world. Talks about extraterrestrial life. Ancient texts all over the world speak of extraterrestrials. Talks about, I'm summarizing this video here, this isn't verbatim. He talks about Sumerian tablets and Zechariah Sitchin. He talks about the Anunnaki, those who came from the high place down to the earth. Anunnaki bred with humans to make a hybrid race. So this links into the missing link that people like Lloyd Pye and Sitchin have spoken about. The gods, extraterrestrials in the ancient world. Hindu Veda, he talks about the gods in flying machines. So I'm just going to quote, this is a quote from this video, and this is when the reptilian claim starts to come into Icke's work. He says, along with this white Martian race, there is what UFO researchers have called a reptilian race. And it's this reptilian race that also interbred with humanity. And I think the reptilian race were the Anunnaki. So he's saying that the reptilian race, and now my understanding of Sitchin and say Lloyd Pye, I mean certainly Lloyd Pye, who I've interviewed, he did not think that the Anunnaki were reptilian.
That's my understanding too, yeah, and that they were actually more similar to Homo sapiens than any type of reptilian race because they used a lot of their DNA to make us, according to those accounts.
That's my understanding of what is alleged to be the Anunnaki, that they were us with a whole lot more powers.
Yeah.
And we are an inferior version of them.
Correct.
That's my understanding of the Anunnaki. When the first interbreeding took place, the hybrids were half human, half Anunnaki, I think reptilian, and they interbred with this Martian race, this white race that became the race that took over the world in effect. When a second interbreeding took place, it wasn't between the Anunnaki reptilian and the humans, it was between the Anunnaki and the hybrid bloodstreams, 75% Anunnaki reptilian, 25% human. And he talks about tracing the pure bloodlines into the modern world. So he's saying that the global elite of today, people like the Queen and Bush and Blair and all these others, have got bloodlines linking back to this hybrid reptilian race. And that these people can shape-shift, they can turn into reptile shape. Now, we're going to discuss, well, you've recently just finished reading David Icke's 1999 book where this is all brought in, called The Biggest Secret.
Correct, yeah.
So you've just finished reading it, haven't you?
Fairly recently, yeah.
Do you want to just expand on what I've just said with regards to what you've read in that book?
Yeah, well, I mean, in summary, it's a very good book. It's a very interesting book, and there were, it's well written. It's easy to understand, and as I was saying to you earlier on today, there's quite a bit, for example, on the Diana assassination, and there were quite a few bits of that, which I didn't know, and there's probably several other sections which, like that, where there were bits and pieces I didn't know and are presented quite well. But, again, he keeps going on about reptilians, and I think reptilians, which seem to be slightly different, and he talks about them having their own bloodline, and I think he mentions about having their own kind of religion almost. So, and you wonder where this has come from, and this book is peppered with references to a person called Arizona Wilder, which I think we're going to talk a little bit about in a few minutes. She appears to be the main source of a lot of this reptilian information. And he does sort of make points about some of the reptilian symbolism that's in various cultures, which is quite interesting. But it's kind of, you know, it's kind of odd how this is put into the book. It's almost like it's woven into the book after the main body of the book was written. You know, like it looks like the book was mainly written, and then he put this reptilian stuff. He interwove it with the sort of the script that he already had. The script, you know, the manuscript he already had. So, and I came across an article by one of the guys, I think one of the researchers who worked on that book with David Icke, Ivan T. Fraser was his name.
Yes.
And he had, you know, he's got a page on, I think it's on truthseeker.co.uk.
Yeah, I think this is, people should read this.
Yes, definitely.
Right. Ivan Fraser was supposed to be proofreading or checking the book for spellings and this kind of thing. And as far as I'm aware, there was a fallout over what was going to be put in the book. So
yeah, that's basically the scenario. And Ivan T. Fraser says, well, you know, he's not trying to be, he's not trying to really get at Icke or judge him too much. He just wanted to set the record straight that he basically advised David Icke that he thought that this Arizona Wilder stuff was not, you know, it shouldn't have, that wasn't really worthwhile putting that in the book, because in his judgment, it was fairly flimsy. Her story was fairly flimsy, and there was
just to expand on that. Then Arizona Wilder is another alleged female monarch victim, sex slave, mind control victim, who Ivan Fraser thinks was a setup. Was a fake mind control victim sent to fool David Icke into speaking about a whole load of other things and get that into his work. This is what Ivan Fraser was saying.
Yes.
And you can read, we can put a link on the screen to this quite long article where he explains his concerns over the biggest secret. And also information about Credo Mutwa, who we're going to talk about in a moment. So Arizona Wilder and Credo Mutwa are two of the influences that David Icke has found out about reptilian theories.
Yes,
I mean, I can read it. He says, having discussed my concerns with David's wife and having sent David emails outlining my concerns over errors in his book and a feeling I have that he has been set up with misinformation and been the target of psychic manipulation over a period from before publication to very recently, September 1999, and as yet having absolutely no feedback from David about any of the major concerns, I decided to publish my findings on the David Icke forum, and then he gets banned from the forum. So if you want to watch the interview that David Icke does with Arizona Wilder, I'm sure you can find that on the internet.
Yes, it's on YouTube, yeah.
Just Google Arizona Wilder interview David Icke and see what you think. See if you think she's genuine.
One of the things that struck me as peculiar in the biggest secret is he continually refers to her, but he calls her a mother goddess, I think is the term that he uses in the book. And that just struck me as odd, as that I think he's putting this in the reference of her being a mind controlled sex slave, or whatever phrase you care to use, but he refers to her as a mother goddess, and that she'd witnessed. And I think the key thing is that Arizona Wilder claims to have witnessed these ceremonies, which involved members of the royal family, and where they turned into reptilians during these. I think it was these. If I remember rightly, Richard, correct me if I'm wrong, but it's where they're drinking blood. Isn't it? They're alleged to be drinking blood. Yeah,
and she also targeted Zachariah Sitchin and is it Lawrence Gardner?
Lawrence Gardner, yeah.
And said that they take part in blood rituals with the royals where shape-shifting happens. Ivan Fraser then goes on to say that that considering Gardner's books are revealing profound insights into the ancient knowledge, I'm not surprised they wanted him demonized. So Ivan Fraser talks about a guy called Brian Desborough, who he says introduced Arizona Wilder to David. So he's highly suspicious about this Brian Desborough guy. So Ivan Fraser is suggesting that Desborough is some sort of government agent that's trying to feed Icke various pieces of disinformation. That's what he's saying in this in this text.
Yeah, yeah.
Now the other person people can watch the Arizona Wilder interview and they can decide for themselves whether it's disinformation and whether David Icke should have included it in his book, The Biggest Secret.
And there is another sort of factor as well that you can find out in that Arizona Wilder, turned out not to be her real name. And I think after that interview, I don't know whether it was quite soon after or a few years after, but she later kind of tried to distance herself from the remarks that she made in that interview, which again, leads you to wonder why she would do that. Why would she after that time say that she, what she said then wasn't totally legit?
Right. He says here, I thought, this is just too ridiculous for words. David, how the hell are you allowing this nonsense to influence you? This is Ivan Fraser saying this about The Biggest Secret, Arizona Wilder. All right, now the other person who's mentioned in the book is Credo Mutwa. Is that right?
Yes.
Because round about this time, David Icke went to South Africa and he spent some time making a couple of videos with Credo Mutwa. Do you just want to tell us a bit about Credo Mutwa, Andrew? Yeah,
well, I understand he's a South African. He was a member of one of the tribes there. And he talks about the tribal, knowledge of the reptilian race. And I did watch the 5 hours of interviews that David Icke did with Credo Mutwa years and years ago. I probably watched it about at least 8 or 9 years ago, maybe longer. And, it's a very interesting account. And Credo Mutwa, he's got this sort of quite engaging sort of accent.
Right. I would call it, the way that he talks, I find it hypnotic.
Yes.
He's got this very slow, precise way of talking, and it draws you in.
It does.
Now, just one or two things to point out about Credo Mutwa. As you said, he's a Zulu shaman, so he's got all this knowledge of ancient African history and legends of certain alien races that may have come to the earth in the dim and distant past and perhaps bred with humanity and all this kind of thing. Now, David Icke's not the first Westerner to go and interview Credo Mutwa. I think this point here is worth pointing out. The researcher John Mack, who did a lot of research into the alien abduction phenomenon, went to meet him in, I think it was 1994, 4 years earlier. Bill Chalker, the Australian UFO researcher, has also interviewed him, and also Zachariah Sitchin has interviewed him. Now, what I found interesting about the John Mack story, about how John Mack met Credo Mutwa. John Mack, this is 4 years before David Icke's getting into the reptilian stuff. John Mack goes to South Africa, and he's asked to be interviewed on a South African television program called Agenda. Now that program was a mainstream program. It was by the South Africa Broadcast Channel, state-owned, right? So it's obviously discussing certain UFOs and that kind of thing. So they invite John Mack onto the show, and they also invite Credo Mutwa via video link from Zimbabwe. So John Mack didn't even know he was going to be on the TV with Credo Mutwa. So he's presented with this South African, sorry, not South, Zimbabwean Zulu shaman, and they're on this TV program together. And Credo Mutwa asks to meet John Mack. So John Mack didn't go to South Africa to meet Credo Mutwa. He was diverted in his trip to go and meet him. And a lot of what Credo Mutwa told John Mack was then incorporated into his book, Passport to the Cosmos. Now, in Credo Mutwa's information, broadly, he speaks about two different races. One is the reptilian race, the Chitahuri, and then there's another race of smaller beings, which John Mack suggests are the grey aliens that we hear about in abduction stories, and he calls these the Mandindas. Now, I'm going to read the videos are available to watch online. You can sit for 5 hours and watch David Icke interviewing Credo Mutwa, and they are interesting to watch, and I'm sure there's some valuable information in there. Now, one thing that an observation I would make of those interviews, they weren't critical interviews. David Icke was asking some very closed questions in those interviews, and in fact, that's actually pointed out by Ivan Fraser, right? There's a lot of information which we haven't got time to go into, but Credo Mutwa is saying that the Chitahuri, which were these reptilians in African folklore that came in these craft to the earth, but he says they were originally from the earth and they were returning, and he does talk about them interbreeding. Now, but some of the questions are leading, in my opinion. Here's a few examples. So David Icke explains to Credo Mutwa that Cathy O'Brien saw George Bush shapeshift into a reptile. He then says, and so many other people have told me this story of world leaders today changing into reptiles in front of their eyes and then changing back again. Icke goes on to say, Miguel de la Madrid, the president of Mexico at the time of George Bush, said to Cathy O'Brien, she quotes in her book, that a reptilian extraterrestrial race interbred with the ancient Central American people because they needed to create bloodlines through which they could operate. And Mutwa then just says, yes. Icke goes on, and he said that these bloodlines were in effect today's world leaders. Does it fit with your knowledge, Credo, that the royal lines of the Chitahuri reptilian human interbreeding become the demigods of the royal families, etc.? But they have gone on in Africa as well as the rest of the world to become the ruling lines and the ruling people of these countries. Mutwa then says, yes, many of them have. At one point Icke states, I must say the way that the evidence that I am uncovering is going, and it's going there very fast, and it syncs so much with what you're saying, is that a race from the stars, a reptilian race, interbred with humanity, they created crossbreed bloodlines which became the middlemen, the demigods, the royal kings and lines ruling power in the ancient world, and through interbreeding have become the presidents, the ruling people at the top of the power structures of banking, politics, of the military, all areas of our lives, that of business, all of it. Is that the way you have seen it yourself? Mutwa replies, yes, sir. So there are many other similar quotes like this where Icke is asserting that the reptilians in South African legends are the Anunnaki that Sitchin talks about. There's another. There's one more quote that I picked up that I want to read, which wasn't expanded on. This is what Credo says in part of his intro. He says, "The group of American people who came to visit me a week or so ago and who left a rather unveiled threat about me shutting up or else my wife will die, who warned me about a certain creature called Adeazar, that this creature is watching me. These people said this, that on Lake Titicaca there is a hidden beam of light coming from the sky onto the surface of South African Lake, that on the 9th of September 1999 something very interesting is going to happen at Titicaca." Now that's interesting. 9th of September 99 is 2 days and 2 years before 9/11, and he's talking about some beam coming down from the sky onto Lake Titicaca. This is Credo Mutwa.
Yeah.
And it's these Americans who've told him this, who are also threatening him.
How interesting.
Now I'm interested to know what this is, he goes on to say. Now Icke then doesn't question him about American people. Who were these American people telling you to keep quiet? So I asked the question, when was John Mack's meeting with Credo Mutwa arranged by someone else in a fairly powerful position who had control over the TV company? Were they put together for certain reason? That's what I ask. And I don't know the reason why David Icke's gone to meet him. I don't know whether he's read about it in John Mack's work or even Sitchin's work, perhaps. I don't know. Now, Credo Mutwa certainly had extreme trauma in his life. He was attacked by knife and almost died, and this, Ivan Fraser actually suggests that he could be a victim of mind control himself, because he talks about waking up on a table, the usual abduction scenario, right? So Credo Mutwa is an alien abductee by his own testimony, right? Which there may be real alien abductees. I don't refute that. But Ivan Fraser is saying, well, has there been some mind control with Credo Mutwa? That's what he's suggesting in that passage. So now there's a chap. I discussed David Icke with somebody else, and I don't know if this is true, who said to me in relation to the reptilian issue, because Icke actually states in the Credo Mutwa tapes that many people have come up to him and told him the same story of people changing into reptiles. Now, chap that I know, he said to me, he said, well, the CIA were sending actors to David Icke's talks throughout America and Canada, or wherever he was in 1998, giving him these stories. So is it possible that there was some sort of CIA operation which involved Arizona Wilder, Credo Mutwa, and various other actors going to his lectures to convince him of this reptilian story? Because in 1997,